Milk and meat. Oy, we just ran out of time today. I'm so sorry, guys. Maybe we'll catch that next week. Let me run through it. What about milk and meat? It's a pretty big deal in Judaism. In fact, it's a huge deal in Judaism. It's right up there with probably even being more prevalent than eating pork or shellfish. You say, where in the world did that come from? Well, let's look at it really quickly. Before I get there, first we shouldn't have that bloody steak. And it probably wasn't kosher slaughtered, so nothing in that picture is perfectly appropriate for us. But let me tell you how we got there. And I'll do it very briefly and try to do it with respect with doing it that briefly. Whenever the Bible mentions something more than once, God's generally trying to get our attention to it. Let every matter be established by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So we get this verse in the Bible, not to boil a kid or a young goat in its mother's milk, and it doesn't have to be just a goat, it could be any young mammal, but we're not supposed to boil it in its mother's milk. From that verse, Judaism has this tradition not to mix milk and meat. You say, wow, that's a large extrapolation of that verse. Well, let me tell you how it got there and why it got there so we can have a little more understanding and respect for it. There's 3 times that it's mentioned in the Torah. And every time that verse is mentioned, it's out of place. Like like God put it there as almost like a stop sign or warning sign, because it doesn't hardly fit the context. So the rabbi said, what are we going to do about this? It's mentioned 3 times. That's more than even some of the other laws are mentioned. And it's always put in prominent places to draw our attention. So what are we supposed to do with this? And the understanding was that this must be very important to God because he mentioned it 3 times. He must be wanting to draw our attention to it because he put it in places where it doesn't really even fit in. It's a verse that kind of sticks out at us. So God obviously must be making a big deal about this. Therefore, we have to make a big deal about this. Now, you can argue with them about it, but let me show you the verses before you start arguing with people that have made decisions about this a long time ago and had a lot of discussion about it. So let's look at the verses very quickly. Exodus 23, 19 through 20. Bring the choicest first fruits of your land to the house of Adonai your God. Don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Behold, I'm sending an angel before you. Do you see how this one sticks out like a sore thumb? Talking about first fruits. They're talking about this angel, and right in the middle, boom, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. So the rabbi said, wow, there's something here. What is God trying to draw our attention to this particular verse for? Well, one, I'm sending an angel with you. That could be Yeshua or the angel of the Lord, but my presence is with you, so pay attention to this. And it's right up there with the first fruits. So that's reference number 1. Reference number 2. Again, in Exodus 34, 26 to 27, you're supposed to bring the choicest, again, first fruits of your land to the house of Adonai your God. You must not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Then Adonai said to Moses, write these words, for based on these words I cut a covenant with you in Israel. So now the first time is in the context of the angel of the Lord is with you. Second time it's in the context of a covenant with you. Wow, that's a pretty huge verse. You put it right there, juxtaposition to the covenant. By the way, hamburger with double cheese and bacon, definitely not on the list. Even if we took the bacon off, still not on the approved list. So one's the angel Lord with you, this one's the covenant, he's putting it in proximity to the covenant, and then there's a third verse. For you are a holy people to Adonai your God. You're not to boil a young goat in his mother's milk. You will surely set aside 1/10 of all your yield of your seed. Wow, it doesn't fit. You would think someone just threw these verses in here, and that's what secular people teach. Oh, they redacted it, and someone just changed the Torah around and just threw verses wherever they felt like. Friends, we don't believe that. We believe every week we point and say, this is by the hand of Moses. This Torah that we have comes all the way from Moses. We believe every word that's written in it. It's true. It's amen. It has not been changed. And so we can't just say people threw verses around. We have to say, Adonai put those verses there for some purpose and some reason. So now have a little more respect for the sages that said, what do we do with these verses? Certainly God's trying to bring our attention. Here he says you're to be a holy people. He puts the verse right next to being holy. And it's up there with tithing. Wow. What are we supposed to do with these verses? Adonai, why'd you put this in here? Well, there's all sorts of arguments. You can try to say, well, it was, paganism, and they were doing this, and therefore God doesn't want us to do it. And there might be some validity to that. We don't have any clear examples of it, but it's possible that it was part of paganism, and there was apparently some tradition that they felt like it would make you more fruitful or something, more able to reproduce more if you mixed a mother's milk with the meat, and somehow they sprinkled it on trees. And so there's some strange things in pagan culture that, yes, we could probably say those from pagan culture. But overall, that doesn't look like the context, because all these are not in the context of pagan culture. These are in context of being a holy people in a covenant. So the sages said, obviously, God thinks this is important, and if he thinks it's important, we may not understand it all, but we're going to think it's important. And now it's become a big deal in Judaism, and I'm not advocating that we bring it to that far of distinction. Some houses have two kitchens, one for meat, one for milk, one set of plates for meat, one set of plates for milk. And it really becomes a big deal. I remember a friend of mine got yelled at because he took a coffee from a cafe in Jerusalem and brought it over to where his wife was eating, and it was a non-dairy restaurant. He got kicked out because he brought milk in. He contaminated the restaurant. It's a huge deal. So just knowing Israel is a huge deal. And in Orthodoxy, it's a major deal. But even amongst Reformed Jews, it's a big deal. So when our visitors come, a lot of times they say, you might not want to eat if they're Jewish, you might not want to eat at their oneg. They mix milk and meat. So for our visitors, even in Reformed is kind of like the bottom level of observance. They say don't eat at City on the Hill's oneg because they mix milk and meat. So we become an offense to our Jewish visitors. So regardless of how you feel about it, leave your feelings at home and prefer our visitors. It's not every day we're getting Reformed visitor, but we want to honor the traditions that brought us here. So whether you disagree with it, what you do at home, we're not going to send the Torah police after you to supervise your kitchen. That's between you and the Lord. When you come here, I'm asking you to consider not mixing milk and meat. Jeannie, I'm going to put it on you to someday, maybe we'll separate our dishes. We're not quite there yet. Not dishes, but I mean, if somebody brings a meat dish, at least that we make a distinction. I think you do that already. So that at least people recognize, okay, that's the meat side over there. If I'm choosing to eat meat this meal, I'll choose not to eat milk. That way at least people know that we've made an attempt to honor the tradition that brought us here. And to honor the sages that had to wrestle with 3 verses that stick out and have prominent connection to covenant, the angel of the Lord, and to being holy. So if you were a sage and had the decision of what to do with this, don't boast over the root. You don't support the root supports you. And know that this was a difficult decision that people wrestled with. And yeah, maybe it got blown out of hand, but I'd rather err on the side of caution than on the side of being too liberal. And just know that for most all Jews that have some level of observance, this is a pretty big deal. Okay, so for you it might be a big deal pork. For them the big deal is separating milk and meat. So out of respect for that, we're going to do some attempt to at least say that we're at least attempting to recognize the tradition and put meat dishes on one side and stuff that are made out of dairy on another side. We've already been doing that, so I'm not introducing a new halakha. It just has been kind of quiet in the background. Now I'm actually making it public.